Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Good morning and a very warm welcome to everyone. I am Manu Kashyapa from Advaita Academy. Let us start with a small prayer. Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavatpada Shankaram Lokashankaram Sarvatma Sarvadrugyoso Sarvadhyasa Nirasakrit Satatam Sannidhattam Me Hridaye Paramashivaha. I welcome you all to day 14 of Global Festival of Oneness 2021. As part of the ongoing festival, we bring you a special pre-recorded weekend session. Today, Professor Sthaneshwar Timalasina ji will be speaking on application of Advaita in yoga in light of Drigdrishyaviveka. For the benefit of our viewers, I would like to introduce Professor Sthaneshwar Timalasina ji is a professor at San Diego State University. He has more than 43 years of teaching experience at various universities. His research interests are in the field of religions of India, Indian and comparative philosophy, Vedic and Tantric studies, yoga studies, philosophy of mind. I welcome you all to this session. This is a pre-recorded session. Please listen to the speaker. Thank you.
विश्वं दर्पण दृश्यमान नगरी तुल्यं निजान्तर्गतं पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिरिवोद्भूतं यथा निद्रया यः साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोध समये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयं तस्मै श्री गुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्री दक्षिणामूर्तये. Drigdrishyaviveka. Let's first understand the word meaning of these three extremely important terms in Advaita Vedanta. Drik, from the root drishi, to see. In Kshatri, in a suffix when it goes back to the nominative, it is the seeing that in itself is the subject. It's extremely important word because seeing here is for consciousness. That in itself is the self, Atman. And Drishya, Drashtum, Yogyam, Drishyam. The entities that are endowed with the capacity to be seen are the objects, basically. I'm not saying it's object because there is this some kind of throwing out sense embedded with object, but for the lack of better words, let's consider that object. Viveka. V is the prefix and which vicilri prithak karane, to separate, to analyze, vividhakarena, visheshena, in a distinctive way, in a particular way, the act of separating, the act of distinguishing, or basically analysis, the analysis of the perceiver and the perceived, the analysis of subject and object, the analysis of consciousness and its field. Amazing book, very concise, very short, but philosophically extremely important. Today, I offer you a brief conversation on some essential nuances that we can trace in this book. You can read this book for self-realization, You can read this book for understanding the philosophy in the school of Shankara. You can read this book also for a comparative philosophy. There is nothing wrong in comparing things. Just because we compare doesn't mean like we cannot know one. If you read any aspect of Hindu philosophy, Nyaya philosophy, Advaita Vedanta philosophy, Madhva's Dvaita philosophy, Ramanuja's Vishishta Advaita philosophy, any of the philosophies, actually, all the philosophical schools are intrinsically dialogical. They are always critiquing each other's perspective and accepting. What is most important for us to take home is they are accepting each other's perspective, and they are not critiquing a huge, broad, overlapping area. Because that's just like when they are picking 1 or 2 points, people think, okay, they are disagreeing with this Buddhist philosopher. They are not critiquing every single article, every single category, some minute issues. And so Drigdrishyaviveka, this Drigdrishyaviveka is an essential text. I generally have understood this as composed by Vidyaranya Swami, and many people, starting from the early times, believe that the book was actually composed by his teacher, Bharati Tirtha, which could possibly be the case. If you see, the one comes with the translation from Ramakrishna Math, actually on top page, I don't even see the author name, only the translator's name there, and only upon conversation in the introduction, the idea of the controversy of the authorship is addressed. My own rationale for why it might have been composed by Vidyaranya rests on not textual philological analysis, but more of a social analysis that Swamiji, Vidyaranyaji, was a far-sighted and sometimes exceptional, going outside of the orthodoxy to incorporate many other traditions. If you read his Jivan Mukti Viveka, you will see him citing many other texts that were not cited by the mainstream Advaitins before. If you read his Panchadasi, the same case applies, that again, the authorship of Panchadasi can also be discussed. But if you read his Sri Vidyarnava Tantra or text like that, you can see that he can actually walk out of the orthodox Advaita Vedanta tradition and compose and incorporate from very many traditions. Although Drigdrishyaviveka is very small, it's very concise, because it has assimilated many ideas coming from mostly Patanjalian yogas, but beyond Patanjalian yogas, incorporates the yoga found in the Yoga Vasishta and many other strands of yoga. So that's why I find it a sort of intricate text with so many nuances. Also, another thing is many of the authors in the earlier time, starting Sureshwara, Padmapada, they embraced one or the other model. For example, Sureshwara is known for Abhasavada, Padmapada is known for Bimba Pratibimba Vada. Likewise, Vachaspati Mishra is known for Avacheda Vada. And these are such details, intricate philosophies within the school of Shankara Jayanti, that each of these separate disciplines can be read in book-length materials and can be explained for years. So it's a very broad philosophical system with multiple nuances. Not like they disagree in the central core points, but there are some divergences and different ways to address the same problem. And in the case of this particular book, we do not see that type of leaning to any specific model, and that tendency is already available in other books of Vidyaranya, whether it's in the Panchadasi or any other text. So coming back to how this Drigdrishyaviveka can be essential for if you are interested philosophically, or if you are interested as a yogi. Why Vedanta and yoga, to my understanding, are not two different projects is because they both are darsanas. Darsana is not simply philosophy. Darsana, to see, to directly apprehend, to bring something to experience. When someone does philosophy in the West, the focus is on theory. What they are trying to do is to theorize things, to idealize, to conceptualize, to make a hypothesis and to test those hypotheses. But when you do darsana, your goal is to bring to your experience the subject matter that has been discussed. So this darsana relies primarily on the empirical grounds that something has to come to experience. That is why pratyaksha, there is always a primacy of pramana. All the Indian philosophical schools begin with pramana, even before talking about prameyas, the objects to be discussed. But even in pramana, they first start with pratyaksha, because there is always the primacy of pratyaksha. So the objective is, when we say Advaita Vedanta is grounded empirically and has commonality with the yoga, in what regard am I saying that? On what ground am I saying that? It rests on the scientific methods. What do I mean by scientific methods? It's something to essentially take off, bracketing, things that are not directly given to experience and go back to things themselves, which, comparatively speaking, Edmund Husserl says the Sache selbst. So this is the thing in itself, or things going back, Juruk, like going back to things themselves. And this is the project of Drigdrishyaviveka, or Advaita Vedanta, broadly speaking, to go back to the way consciousness unfolds itself in its most intricate, in its most primary stage. Therefore, the scope of Advaita is resting on the grounds of direct apprehension. Rishayaha mantra drashtaraha. Even the definition of a rishi as someone who directly encounters, sees the mantras, that is, there is already a direct apprehension, seeing, encountering, pratyaksha is embedded even in the very concept of a rishi. So therefore, this Advaita is science not because it talks about some chemicals or some astrophysics or some quantum physics, like many people love to hear that type of Vedanta these days, and good for them. But Vedanta is science in the sense that its preamble is scientific, that it is not asking you to have unquestioning faith, unwavering belief, that if you ask a question about yourself or the world or Maya or anything, you might never go to salvation or heaven or something. No, the reason the premise of Advaita is scientific is because you rationally go through there. Number one, you use pramana. theoretical means of knowledge, and number 2, you take home what you can experience. But for that, it takes time. Yes, in the beginning, you might have to accept some of the axioms, some of like pre-given. Not that it is all the way through though. Why is in the beginning, when subjects are not capable to reach to those conclusions with their own analysis, they may have to start from taking some of the aspects for granted. For example, one may not know that the final reduction or bracketing goes all the way back to aham, the self, and then we will start analyzing what the ego, what the ahankara projects, and even there, what is the materiality, what is the seen, the observed part within the ego, and what is the subject, pure consciousness aspect within the ego. When we start deconstructing even the ego, then we will actually go to encounter what we even mean by Atma Satyam. What is immediately given to us as the first or primary truth, that my own awareness of me, not even the awareness of me as me, this ego, but awareness of me as the foundation, as the basis upon which this ego presides. That is where Advaita Vedanta rests, and that is what no pramana can ever challenge. Because even for the basis of pramana, you always need this foundation. Mandana Mishra therefore says, Vastu Swarupa Matra Vagahi Pratyaksham in his Brahma Siddhi, amazing text actually. Vastu Matra Avagahi Pratyaksham. What perception reveals is the thing as such. But what percepts? Because if Vastu, Vedyam Vastava Matra Vastu Shivadam, if the Vastu, what it is the very Brahman, how can we say that perception just reveals the thing as it is? Because, you know, when I see a cow or a tree or a school or mom and dad or son, you know, wife, all these things. Actually, no, we do not. When I see a car and I see this is a car, what are you talking about? I see car directly. No, the concept car is laden. When a baby, before he learns the word car, I think, you know, should be able to see the car. What is that thing as such before it is contaminated by our concept? What is the thing as such before it is fragmented into forms and names? Names are imposed, and these particular forms we see are based on our biology. We interpret things being red and black and green based on the color patterns we have. What if we are color blind? You know, some people have some color blind, like a degree of color blindness actually. I myself have only sometimes, a difficulty to separate between green and blue, I told you. So, the thing that I see will be different from what the other person sees. And for those who are not able to see colors, multiple colors, then the way they see that thing is going to be different, but they are not seeing the thing. So therefore, what is it that is directly given to consciousness before it is determined by our specificity of the body or specificity of our language? That is Brahman. Because what is Brahman? The thing as such, the being per se and consciousness, because the being as such is never conditioned, never blocked from our perception, neither is consciousness ever blocked, because it's always revealing. There never is suspension of consciousness. There are some interesting parallels, although they come from different premises. I love the philosophy of Edmund Husserl. I brought in my conversation even before that the study of consciousness. There are many things we can learn from them, and I hope most likely they would learn to actually understand some of the premises of the Advaita Vedanta, particularly its understanding of consciousness is not conditioned by time and space, or not always necessarily object directed, because it's like we are making in phenomenology, intentionality, object directedness is a precondition for consciousness to emerge, and it's always streamlike. So these are some of the things that I think we can have a broader conversation. So going back again, there are a couple of further points on Swaprakashata, self-revealing aspect of consciousness. What we need to know is what consciousness is meant by the Advaita Vedantin and what is meant by consciousness, even by the Buddhists, and particularly by the Western philosophers, are not identical. Mostly they are talking about the mirroring or the mirrored and momentary, fragmented, stream-like, which we call whatever is pratibimbit, reflected in the buddhi and the intellect. Not the basis, not the creature consciousness, but the judgmental aspect of consciousness, the intentional aspect of consciousness. So if we were to understand consciousness as it is meant in the Advaita of Shankara, of course, we will need to engage some of the texts like Shiva Kevaloham. It's very simple actually. What are the things superimposed? When I think of myself, what comes first? When someone asks, who are you? I'll say my name. So no, I mean, who are you? I'm like, what do you mean? Okay, I'm this person right here. Or I will go to my occupation, I'm a professor. Or might be nationality, for some people are so obsessed with that. But they are impositions. Or relations. I'm a husband, I'm a dad, relations. People are even more obsessed with these things. That's what called Maya, avidya. It's just like all these things are imposed on you. It's like the colors. And we read the blue jackal story in Panchatantra, and then like I am blue, therefore I'm unique, and that's all the world is. People are just imposed or accepting different colors, and for you to understand the you inside, you need to go beyond the colors. That is where Advaita Vedanta comes, and that is the goal of Drigdrishyaviveka. So I'll just read a few verses, because we can read the whole book, but I want to give you a little sampling of what the text is like, both philosophically and if you are interested in Advaita as a practitioner, either way it works. Rupam drishyam lochanam drik tadrishyam driktu manasam Drishya dhivrittayas sakshi drigeva natu drishyate. Rupam drishyam, form, color, shape. Drishya, the object perceived. What is seeing rupa? What is seeing color? Lochanam drik, the eyes are the seers. So in relation to the object, we see, my eyes see these things. Let me look at it. I saw with my own eyes. So there is this, of course there is the ego as a higher subject, but there is some sort of agency given to eyes. Tadrishyam driktu manasam. And how do we see our own eyes? Look into mirror. Okay, you do not see your own eyes. By looking into mirror, you only see the reflection of your eyes. Let me kind of use one of my eyes to see the other. I know you can't see that either. You don't see that either. How do you see your own eyes? Tad drishyam driktu manasam. When the eyes are the objects of perception and the mind is the subject, mind is the perceiver. Is the mind the ultimate perceiver? Some philosophers thought so. There is nothing above and beyond the mind. Chitta santana, the stream of the mind or stream of momentary consciousness. Vijnana santati, vijnapti matra. Drishyaviveka. So just like you see your eyes with your mind, you see what is happening in your mind, all the thoughts coming and going, all ideas coming and going, emotions coming and going, sensations coming and going, memories coming and going, fantasies coming and going. Drishyaviveka. Shakshi drigeva. There is something witnessing now. Not seeing like I am the seer, but it's observing, it's monitoring, it's a higher order perception happening. Drigeva natu drishyate. And this is only the perceiver and is never perceived. So from the beginning, I can give you a working translation. Form is the object of perception and the eyes, the subject. The eyes are the objects of perception while the mind is the subject. The modes of the mind are the objects of perception and the witnessing consciousness is the subject. But this is the subject alone as it never is an object of perception. Drishya dhivritaya sakshi drigeva natu drishyate. The same way, what happens in the perception of objects? Nila pita sthula sukshma rasva dirghadi bhedataha nana vidhani rupani pashyallo chanamekadha. You see the blue, the yellow are big and small, short and long. Always the forms appear in the manifold and the perceiving, the eyes is always singular. The same way, and then we'll go back to how many ways the eyes take back information and the mind synthesizes, and even in the mind, so many different things appear, and then that is even just merely without touching, seen indifferently by the self. Forms are manifold due to difference as blue and yellow or gross and subtle or short and long, but the eyes perceive them as one. What is the project Advaita Vedanta now? Just with the sampling of these two verses. We are bracketing, and that systemic bracketing and going back to the way it is given. As far as that project is concerned, I'm considering it as identical to the project of phenomenology. But when we are not willing to bracket anything or accepting some assumptions based on other sciences, then we are not actually relying on consciousness itself the way it reveals. Advaita Vedanta goes beyond any reduction in the sense that it asks you to solely see what consciousness as it is without any preconditions and without any suppositions, even if those suppositions are coming from pure sciences. So what do we know? No deti nastametesha na vriddhim yati nakshayam Soyam vibhati athanyani vasayet sadhanam vina. When objects manifest to consciousness, we see those objects. We do not see the emergence of consciousness, that, okay, I was completely unconscious, there was no consciousness before I became aware of this object. Or that when the object stopped appearing and then I was knocked down to my unconscious state, because such things cannot be verified, because even for the verification of that we will require consciousness. No deti nastameti esha. This consciousness is not something that begins, that has beginning or an ending, because you are not seeing the genesis of consciousness. You are not seeing the end of consciousness. No vriddhim yati na kshamo. I'm more conscious now, but that is not the growth of consciousness. Like consciousness getting fat, it doesn't happen. Your body gets fat. You don't have the consciousness getting fat or thin. What about I'm sometimes more aware? That is only your buddhi vritti, your intellect, which requires a lot of physicality for it to function. Your consciousness does not require something else for its manifestation. Soyam vibhati. Ata anyani bhasayet sadhanam vina. It does not require, without any object, without any instrument, it manifests other entities. But for its manifestation, it doesn't depend on something external. Even the consciousness that manifests the world does not require next consciousness to manifest itself. That is why consciousness is called Swayam Prakasa. The meaning of Swayam Prakasa is self-revealing, self-illuminating. So the projection of the world, the projection of the manifold is intervened by these instruments in between. There is this basis as pure consciousness. And then there are these antahkarana, the modes of the mind. And then in these modes of the mind, the consciousness gets the coloring based on all the presuppositions now. And then when we see things, we already see based on our vasanas, based on our preconditions. So this is already, think of this as a mantra, like doing yoga through this. How are things colored? Suppose you are having great time with your friend yesterday and something went wrong and you found out that he had done something very mean to you and you stopped liking him and you are actually very mad today, and then you see him today and then you already see with this precondition of not liking. So, like people are, we use in America the word colorblind. Some people see the other person not as the person, but as white or as black or as South Asian or Asian. So you can't even walk as a human being. So why this is beneficial? Now you can see that this whole affirmation, we are this, we are that, that's not the teaching of Hindu Dharma. That's not the teaching of yoga. The thing itself, the persons, their true nature, is not conditioned by these presuppositions, all these identities. Antahakarana vrittischa chitichhayaikhyamagata vasanaha kalpayet swapne bodhe chair vishayan bahi. When the shadow reflected in the consciousness becomes one with the modes of the inner instruments, that includes the mind, the intellect, the ego, just like the internal world is a pure expression of our vasana, mental imprints. The external world is what is revealed by the sensory faculties already being colored by the same vasanas. So the goal of yoga is to see, go back to things in themselves. Do not ever forget that. It is not just about realizing the self, getting moksha, because getting moksha is we are conditioned to see things not the way they are, and moksha, liberation, is our ability to see the way things are, see the truth as it is, and that is yoga. The modes that define the mind, when combined with the image consciousness, constitutes the mental images, vasanas. While in a dream and while in a waking state, what happens? It constitutes by means of the sensory faculties, the objects out there. So, Akshair Vishayan Bahi Kalpayet. This is very important. We have this rigidity of the inside and outside. Our fundamental Dvaita, duality, rests on this assumption of the inside and outside. Where are you? I'm inside. Inside where? Inside my skin, inside my head, inside my heart. Where is the inside? You know? So this inside is a never-ending journey, because this inside is just a sort of a localizing the self, mostly grounded biologically to fulfill the purpose of the body. Our constitution of the ego as inside helps us to create the reality as outside, and then helps us make subject and object dichotomy, and helps us live our normal everyday life. That is a Vyavahara Satya. I am not saying that truth does not exist. But that is not Parama Artha, the way, the truth, the thing as it is. Because this very construction of inside and outside is just based on our sensory faculties, our indriyas. Upeksha nama rupe dve satchidananda tatparaha samadhim sarvada kuryad hridayeva athava bahihi. Another verse there in the text, Drigdrishyaviveka. What is yoga? Upeksha nama rupe dve. Just now discard the name and the form. And then Satchidananda Tatpara. Be oriented, be dedicated to Sat, Chit and Ananda. Pure being, pure consciousness, and its inner fabric is bliss. Not a sensory bliss, not object-directed bliss, but unconditional bliss. And then Samadhim Sarvada Kuryad, be in yourself. This is what Samadhi is. This is not the Samadhi in a normal sense of thinking of an elephant with a monkey, or something like that, or just think of one mantra or something like that. This is a Samadhi of liberating the mind from the superimposed names and forms, and then be in the pristine nature of who you are, in pure being. That also is pure consciousness, and in there you are going to have the natural surge of the bliss. Where am I going to start that meditation? Hridaya athava bahi. So you can think of that. You can be in that Samadhi either in your heart or outside, in any external world. So it does not matter. Localization is insignificant here. because the topic was yoga, so I'm extracting only the essential verses that demonstrate how much of yoga material is discussed in Drigdrishyaviveka. Savikalpo nirvikalpaha samadhir duvido hridi drishya sabdanu vedena savikalpaha punardvidha. Samadhir dvividha. In your heart, when you are situated, or in your consciousness, when you are situated, you are going to have two different types of samadhi. Number one is savikalpa, when you have these constructions, conceptualizations, when you have ideas, when you have vrittis, mental modification, when you have vikalpa. And then nirvikalpa, when your mind is devoid of conceptualization, nirvikalpa. So, drishya sabdanu vedena savikalpaha punardvidha. In the savikalpa consciousness, you have two subdivisions. One, impregnated, pierced by, or having the qualification of drishya, the object of perception, or shabda, name, basically, the word, the language, name and form. So, what are the vikalpas? Vikalpas are twofold. One, language, that is also vikalpa. Another, form, images, that's also vikalpa. I work a lot on savikalpa type samadhi because everybody loves to talk on nirvikalpa. But actually, if you really want to progress, I got these ideas from hiking. Because every time I thought of hiking from the top of the mountain, I realized it doesn't work that way. You have to always start from the beginning. Maybe if you are dropped off, from a parachute, but that's not fun. That's not hiking. So the idea is that you have the vikalpas. These vikalpas are in the form of the name or just a structure, just the images. And then you can have neither name nor form. You can have this state devoid of this nirvikalpa. Kamadyas chittaga drishyas tat sakshittvena chetanam dhrayet drishyanu samadhi savikalpakaha. So Vidyaranya also discusses savikalpaka, that kamadyaha chittaga drishya. You have this arousal, for example, or desire in your mind. You have a desire. You may not know always what you desire, though. Maybe you know when you are angry. Sometimes some people don't even know that, though. Maybe arousal. Again, the same problem. But sometimes you do know what you have in your mind, right? How do you know what you have in your mind? So because you are the Sakshi, you are not the mind. That is how you know. You don't need to know always what you have in your mind to make a theory that you have the access to the objects of your mind. You can see things in your mind. You can't deny that. Kamadyaha chittaga, the desire, etc., they are in the mind. They belong to the mind, and they are the objects to be seen. And the perceiver is the witnessing self, the sakshin. So when the consciousness sees, observes these vrittis, drishyanu viddoyam, this samadhi, which is called savikalpaka, has the drishya, the objects, impregnated. Asangas satchidananda swaprabho dvaita varjitaha asmiti shabda viddoyam samadhi savikalpakaha. So the other type of savikalpaka samadhi was the sabda anuvidya, meaning the mode of absorption wherein there is conceptualization, but not the form, but the word. What is that type? I am the Brahman. Like when you say Aham Brahma Asmi, I am the Brahman. That word resonating, the sentence buzzing in your head. If you are in this Samadhi, if you have nothing else in your mind, of course also with the meaning of the word, not like, you can't just translate that word into Chinese, imagining that you don't know Chinese, and then just keep repeating that Chinese, because you would know what that means. Then that would not be like a Savikalpaka Sabdanuvidya Samadhi. Because you need to have the meaning of that to get to the state of Samadhi. But then, where there is no reduction of the word or the language, then that is, even though that is a state of Samadhi, but that is still Sabda Anuvidya. That is the state where language penetrates, language pierces through it, or language conditions, basically. Now, this is how two different types of Savikalpaka Samadhi Vidyaranya discusses here. Or, okay, Bharati Tirtha, fine. Swanubhutira saveshad Drishya Shabda Vupekshato Nirvikalpa Samadhisyan Nivata Sthita Deepavate. When you discard both the name and the form, the object of perception and the language by means of which you conceptualize, verbalize, then what happens there? Swanubhuti rasaveshat. You are situated only in your pure experience. Then at that state, you are in the nirvikalpaka state of Samadhi. You do not have any vikalpa, any conceptualization. You are free of all the modes of conceptualization. That is the highest state of Samadhi discussed here. How does the absolute reduction work in the Advaita? Just exemplary. That why do you take things as a precondition for consciousness? For example, you can always say without the body there is no consciousness, because show me one example where there is the body and no consciousness, or there is no body and there is consciousness. I understand that. But what we are saying is, the way consciousness manifests itself, it does not grasp body as a precondition for consciousness to be. That is where Vidyaranya is trying to take us. This unconditional state of consciousness. Ridiva bahya deshepi yasmis kasmischa vastuni samadhiradya sanmatran nama rupa prithak kritihi. You separate the name and separate the form. You see someone, you call her by her name, and then you see this structure, amazing, beautiful form. Try to see the person without that particular structure, particular form, without that particular name. What do you see? Would the form be a precondition for the thing as such to be? No. Would the name be precondition for the thing as such to be? No. But the being as such, consciousness as it is, and the bliss in its primordial form will still remain there. That is at least what Vidyaranya is telling us. Even when we bracket all these other given, Sanmatran nama rupa prithak kritihi, the separation of the name and the form from pure being as it is, whatever exists, basically. We are not rejecting whatever it is there. All we are saying is the thing as it is not its name, or is not the way it is given to me in my everyday consciousness. What it is then? The being, consciousness, and bliss, those things cannot be negated. Akhandaikara samvastu sachidananda lakshanam ityavachinna chinteyam samadhir madhyamo bhavete. So this when we are taking an object and we start reducing the name and the form to go to the pure being, then that is the elementary form of consciousness. We are saying akhanda ikara samvastu sachidananda lakshanam. When we go to the state that the thing as it is boundless, limitless, as it is, of the character of being, consciousness and bliss. And this thinking, the very idea in this form, is considered the intermediate stage of Samadhi. The intermediate stage meditation is the mode of thinking without any interruption, that the singular constant entity is of the character of being, consciousness and bliss. So, if I were to give you a gloss of what type of things constitute yoga in Vidyaranya's Drigdrishyaviveka discourse, and what is not the central stage in this particular discourse, we will start. Vidyaranya starts a gradual progression of the mind, first taking the object without any precondition, not even the precondition of Advaita analysis. Take the thing as it is, as it appears to you, as you accept in your conventional life, like money. And then you identify that as this is $10 bill. You have the name and you are stuck in that particular structure. The dollar bill is an imposition in our time. If you were to take that 200 years back, nobody would understand what that thing is, So that this is how it goes. The thing as it is has always some kind of names imposed. That is not its absolute reality. We call it paper, and before that paper was made, it would be maybe just bark or some plants, depending what it is made of, and then so on. Where do you go after that? The state of reflecting upon speech, you go back to observe the language. When you discredit the form, you now analyze the structure, the name, and you also bracket the name, the speech, how it is identified. And then you go further deeper to where there is neither externality nor verbalization. You stop seeing things as outside, because outside is created by inside, and inside and outside is the game played by your body for the sake of the body. Even the ego does not necessarily need inside and outside, but it's like when it likes to subjugate, objectify things, and then the ego needs things as outside. It's a psychological requirement also. And now what happens when we go deeper? Initial act of observing the external and then bracketing their externality. What does that even mean? How can you bracket the externality? When you see things, why do you have to say this is outside? You do not always see things as outside. Outside is when you are asked where it is, localization. The nature, the character of the thing as such When Mandana says Vastu Matra Avagahi Pratyaksham, or perception directly reveals the way the object is, it is not even manifesting the object in relationship to you or in relationship to another object. It does not cognize difference. It recognizes the entity as it is. The stage of direct exposure of pure being. Now you go deeper. You analyze deeper to go to the basis of who you are. And then where do you go? Your pure being, your pure consciousness. And then that is where you get the final stillness, lacking any internality or externality. And that is where Advaita is trying to take you. That is the method of Advaita. That is actually particularly the device, developed in this Drigdrishyaviveka. Very concise, but very exact. The idea is to progress from the way entities are given to consciousness and go to its basis, to its foundation, and to have the direct exposure of as it is. And what is as it is? The very being, before it is conditioned, and pure consciousness, before it has its horizon, before it has its intentional object. And that is the foundation of Advaita Vedanta, and that is the goal of Drigdrishyaviveka. It is not to go to your ego, the Cartesian ego. It is to go beyond that and actually even discredit that particular ego so that you are in this non-dual state. Otherwise, it would not be Advaita. If it is a teaching of a discrimination of the objects of perception from the subject of perception, this would not make even sense. It would not be a book on Advaita Vedanta. Therefore, it is even to negate that internality. And that is where we get to the basis, the foundation. Om Tat Sat.
From the entire team of Advaita Academy, we thank Professor Sthaneshwar Timalasina immensely for sharing us this wonderful lesson with us today. Thank you once again, Professor. With this, we conclude yet another session of Global Festival of Oneness. In the evening session, Sri Surya Tahoraji will be speaking on Vedanta and leadership. Please tune into the session. If you have not registered, please register through our website, our social media pages like Facebook and Twitter. There is an important announcement for serious sadhakas. Indica Renaissance Fund is pleased to announce a scholarship scheme of 50% of the fees payable for 6 selected sadhakas. I urge all the seekers and sadhakas to make use of this wonderful opportunity. With this, we conclude this session. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.